In this video, I'm gonna give you an overview of RIB building blocks. So RIB stands for Router Interactor Builder, and typically, sort of the bare minimum how it looks, it's this, right? It's those three units. But it's in actuality, in reality, it's actually more than that, and the diagram for it looks more like this. There is always also sort of for each RIB there is also a component, and there is an optional presenter in the view. And they have the following responsibilities. The builder is the entry point into each RIB, and it's the thing that builds and initializes and connects everything. It puts everything together for each RIB and prepares it to be to do work, right, and to be ready to be attached to your application RIBs tree. So essentially, RIB initializes interactor, and then optionally initializes presenter and the view, and then it initializes router, and it returns the router to whoever called that builder to route to that RIB, to this RIB. And to do that, builder uses component. Component's responsibility is to resolve dependencies for that particular RIB. So essentially that thing, it either knows, let's say your interactor has two dependencies. It needs a service object to do networking, and let's say it needs a storage object to persist the results of networking, or maybe display something from the sort of cache to the user that was saved before. So it has those two as dependencies. This is where, so when builder creates this interactor, it needs those two things that this interactor depends on, and it will use component to resolve that. And component in turn would either initialize the dependencies objects, or it will get them up from the hierarchy, up the tree from the parent RIB. And essentially, yeah, and that's the purpose of component, that its job is to provide dependencies for a RIB. Then a router is responsible for attaching or detaching child RIBs of that RIB, and it also does, if it's a RIB that has a view, it also does the dirty work of actually navigating from its own view of this RIB to whatever child view it attaches. It will do, let's say, push on nav stack, or present, or attach containment API, child view controller, things like that. Interactor's purpose, interactor is where the business logic lives. So its responsibility is to contain all the useful business stuff, business logic useful to your user of that RIB things, right? So this is where you will have your data processing, computations, anything related to actual useful work performed by this particular scope of your application. And then we have presenter and the view. So this, technically it's two things, but the reason they're displayed like this in this box, and they're like overlap each other, because actually at the end of the day there's one object that plays both roles, and that object is the view controller. In sort of the first implementations of RIB's architecture, they had them split, so presenter was one object and view was another object, but what they found is that typically presenter becomes it has a lot of boilerplate, and it's a pass-through object that doesn't have much, so they decided to merge it with the view. And at the end of the day, what it means, if your RIB has a view, that means it has a view controller, and the view controller will implement two interfaces. It will implement the view interface, and it will implement the presenter interface. Those are two protocols, and through view interface, through view protocol, that's how the router talks to that view. Essentially, router owns the view so that it can do navigation when it attaches child or detaches children ribs. And interactor also owns the view, but through presenter interface. Interactor, as it executes its business logic, eventually at some point it will need to tell the presenter to display some data on the screen. So that's the interface through which they communicate, and then interactor passes model objects to presenter, and then presenter will massage them and format them into view models, and view models is what passed down ultimately to the view to display. View in this case is pretty simple. It doesn't have much logic, actually no logic at all besides rendering data, right? Rendering the view models it was passed. And then when the user interacts with the view, then it will notify presenter about the user interactions, and presenter then in turn will actually sort of, again, format and map it into whatever the interactor understands, typically either sort of raw data of some input or actual data transfer objects or model objects. And then the interactor will perform the actual business logic of processing them, maybe using that service that was injected to send them over the network to server, right, or something like that, and then get back the result, and then tell presenter to display that result, and which in turn will tell the view to render it. But again, since that thing is actually one object, presenter and the view, that logic typically will live in the view controller. But you can certainly, if you really want to, and if presenter logic becomes too complex, you can split them apart and create a new object and have two instead, and that's perfectly fine. So yeah, that's an overview of ribs, what they really actually consists of and composed of.